Welcome to Basically a Therapist, but without the degree. I'm Lauren Larson, and I'm just so excited that you're here with me. I can't believe that we are now 18 episodes into this podcast. I feel like it just started last week, and here we are 18 episodes deep, and it's really exciting. I wanted to come on here and talk about just 5 tips that I would give to couples, specifically newlyweds, but it doesn't have to be just to newlyweds, to have a successful marriage. There are a lot of tips, more than 5 tips that I would give, but I wanted to just start with 5 because that's just kind of what came to mind. And I really liked the layout of last week's episode. And so I kind of wanted to stick along with that theme. And so we're going to just talk about 5 tips for a successful marriage. And one of the very first tips that I would give, tip number 1, the most important tip to have a successful marriage is to put God in the center of it. Make him not only Lord over your individual lives, but also your marriage. He can do so much more with your marriage, through your marriage, in your marriage than you could ever imagine. And he can just make it something so much better than you could if you tried to control everything. If you try to take matters into your own hands, if you tried to manipulate and control the situation, it wouldn't turn out as great as God's plan for it. And so some of the things that I have found to be really helpful in putting God at the center of your marriage is to pray together. It is so vulnerable to do that. There's something so vulnerable and intimate about praying together, and there is something so powerful about it. I don't know what it is, but when you are connecting spiritually, when you are connecting in the spirit, you're joining forces together to fight against the enemy's advances. It unifies you. It sends a message that you are not only unified physically and maritally, relationally, but you're also unified spiritually. And there is nothing quite like being unified spiritually. And so pray together. If it's scary, it's okay. I feel like the enemy wants to keep you scared. Too scared to open yourself up and pray with your spouse. But I would encourage you, because that is a lie from the enemy, I would encourage you to pray with your spouse today, right now, today. Pray over them. You can send them a prayer via voice text. You can send them a prayer via text message. You can write out a prayer. You can pray together at dinner. Just start small. And you can let your spouse know that this is something that you want to do, but start. Don't let the enemy keep you disconnected. Don't let the enemy keep you scared. He is much more scared of you guys spiritually connecting and spiritually fighting than he is if you guys are individually doing so. And that's not to discount that we are not powerful individually, but think how much more powerful we are when we are fighting together in the spirit with our spouse. That's so good. Another one is to worship together. Going to church together, worshiping together, putting on worship music in your house, singing together, praying in tongues, reading the Bible together, whatever. Worship together. There is nothing for me personally like seeing my husband worship in church, where he is like hands raised, surrender to God. There is nothing like that. I think for me, it creates a sense of safety because he is so willing to put himself out there and be vulnerable and show people that he is God's and that he is for God. That it gives me freedom and space, but freedom, I guess, from judgment or worry of what he's going to think of me. Study the Bible together. Find a book in the Bible that you guys can read together, or find a devotional, like a marital devotional that you could do together. But connect with each other spiritually. When God is the center of it all, you will experience more joy and more peace and love and forgiveness that you'll have for each other. You'll have more of all of that for each other in the situations that you face. Number 2, do not, I repeat, do not stop pursuing your spouse ever. Just because you have them doesn't mean that you should relax in your pursuit of them. Just because you are married and committed to each other doesn't mean that you don't put in effort, that you're not intentional in your relationship with them. In fact, it should be quite the opposite. You should still be dating one another. And I know that there are seasons where it's not as easy, or there are kids, there are new kids, there's transitions happening in life. I get it. But think how much it speaks to your spouse when you intentionally carve out time to date them, even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of change or transition. It shows your spouse that they are a priority and that your time with them is important, and it's non-negotiable. So date them. And when I say date them, it doesn't have to be extraordinary dates. You don't even have to leave the house, but you can set the tone in your home. You can set up something cute in the backyard. You can have a cute movie night at home. You can have a game night. You can whatever. There are so many different things. You can look for ideas online. TikTok has the greatest ideas for date nights. Look it up, but be intentional. Date them. Write cute messages to them. Whether it's on their mirrors, like you can buy those markers that you can write on the mirrors with, or putting sticky notes in their car or their lunch. But just never stop pursuing each other. It is so important that your spouse feels prioritized, that they still feel wanted by you. They are still the love of your life. I know life changes when you get married. I know things change. But when you dated them for a reason. And you did things to win them over. You did things to show your interest. What were those things that won them over? What were those gestures? Those whatevers? What did you do? Continue those things. Those shouldn't stop just because you're married. Ever. Number 3, the way that your spouse reacts, responds, and shows up isn't about you. And I know that that's really hard because it's hard not to take things personally when our spouse reacts a certain way towards us, or responds a certain way, or doesn't show up in a certain way that we wanted or needed. It actually has nothing to do with us. And that's not to, I don't want you to hear that maybe what we're doing or how we're showing up isn't wrong. Like just because the way that somebody reacts or responds or behaves isn't about us doesn't mean that we're off the line here. Like we still are accountable for how we are showing up. However, there are triggers, there are learned responses and reactions that your spouse may have that he or she learned before you, outside of you, and still lives in that. Like that is a normal response or reaction for them. And that has nothing to do with you. And this can be hard to not take personally. But I think the sooner that we realize, just in general, not even just in marriage, but in general, that other people's reactions and responses aren't about us, the more that we can objectively look at them without getting offended or feeling the need to defend ourselves or whatever. But we can look at them, and understand the why behind they did what they did and still want better. There are boundaries, but there is a grace as well. You know, we can have boundaries, but they don't need to be rigid. We can have boundaries, but we don't need to cut people out right away. We can have boundaries and we can have grace for people. We ourselves are imperfect. And so our spouse is also going to be imperfect. And so we would want grace when we mess up. And we need to be willing to extend that grace as well. There's so much in this world that is not about you. I recently had a friend talk to me, confront me, really, I guess is what it was, a couple of weeks ago about how I was showing up in the friendship and how I was distant and not really showing interest or not really, just not being the same that I used to be. And this friend took it personally. And I had to let them know that I had been going through my own stuff and that I didn't have capacity to be showing up the way that I used to. And there are times when people just don't have the capacity to show up in the way that they normally do. And we need to have a grace for that. There are going to be seasons where our spouse is stressed with work stuff, family stuff, other stuff. There's just going to be times where our spouse isn't able to show up in the way that he or she can. And that's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem. And we need to be flexible and hold space for them. But on the flip side of that, we also need to be careful that it doesn't become a long pattern to where there's no more connection with you guys. You know, I feel like there's just a really good balance with a lot of these topics that I talk about, you know, with boundaries. Like, yes, it's important to have boundaries. And it's important not to cut people off too soon. And it's important to allow people to give people space when they're going through stuff, and also not allow it to get too bad. There's a both and with a lot of this stuff. It doesn't have to be either or, and it's not always black and white. But the way that your spouse responds and reacts and shows up is not about you. Number 4, love and honor and respect your spouse. This is a big one. There's a book, and I think it's called Love and Respect. And it talks about how men need to feel respected by their wives. They need to feel respected by their spouses. And women need to feel loved by their spouses. And this can get difficult because when you're not feeling loved and honored and respected, it's hard to show and give love and honor and respect. And so women, I want to encourage you to show respect to your spouse. Show them the respect that they need. And men, you also need to do respectful things. And that's a whole other topic that a man should probably be talking about, but I'm just going to say, like, yes, we need to respect our husbands, but husbands, you also need to be. There could be a reason why your wife doesn't respect you. Are you acting like a child? Are they acting like a mom, like to you? Are you being responsible? Are you irresponsible? There are things that can be done that lose respect. Man, this is a touchy subject. I don't know how deep I want to go into this. This is a lot. Love and honor and respect your spouse. Husbands, you are supposed to show love to your wives as Christ loved the church. And we know how he loved the church. He sacrificed himself for it. Love and honor and respect in the decisions that you make individually, in the words that you speak about each other and to each other. Show love and honor and respect. Your words matter. Your actions matter. How you treat each other matters. How you speak to each other matters. How you behave when they're not around matters. How you behave when they are around matters. Love and honor and respect. And lastly, your spouse is not your enemy. They are not your enemy. Your spouse and you are a team. I talked about this last week, but you are unified and you are one. When you get married, you become one flesh. You become one unit. You become a team. And it is not you against each other. It is you two against situations. You two against challenges. You two against whatever comes your way. It's up to you two to figure out a solution. But your spouse is not your enemy. Be for each other. Even when you're in conflict with one another, you are not enemies. Work to find the problem and figure out a solution together. And there's so much in this that I could talk about, and there's just so much in this that I could talk about, because it takes not being offended, not choosing to be offended, and it takes looking at things objectively. And it's where you kind of take your feelings, you kind of in a healthy way, detach yourself from it so that way you can look at the issue together. You can look at the problem together and figure out what the issue is and figure it out together. There's like a healthy sense of detachment that needs to take place where, again, going back to point 3, you know that the way that they respond and react and behave and show up isn't about you. And so therefore, you don't need to be offended by it, and you can figure out, okay, this is what's happening, objectively looking at it and saying, okay, this is what's happening. What's the why? What's the how? How do we fix this? How do we solve this? What works best for the both of us? What works best for our marriage? What honors and respects each other? How do we show love to each other in this? But always remember that your spouse is not your enemy. Thank you so much for being here with me. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world. Like and share this episode. I am trying to grow this channel and I cannot do it without you. And so I just thank you for your help and your support. And I will see you next week. Bye. Yeah.